What's up guys, Mcdoubles back here with a brand new video, and today I want to talk about PvP in MMORPGs. In this video, I'm technically going to be doing two things. Number one, I'm going to talk about PvP, specifically World PvP, in regards to the main game I play, which is World of Warcraft, and specifically in regards to the main type of way I play WoW, which is different servers with their own rule sets that are increasingly becoming more PvE and war mode based and less PvP like they used to be. I'm going to advocate for why I believe PvP is the mode that you should be making any server on, because it's the most fair mode, and why. But also in a bigger brain sense, right? Talking about MMORPGs in totality, I want to talk about PvP as a whole and what's been happening to it over the last 5 to 10 years in regards to player sentiments towards PvP and also developer sentiments and what they might be getting away with. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's jump right in. So I really want to talk about why PvP is not the problem in the WoW community and also how to fix it. And I'm going to be totally real with you guys. I have analyzed this very deeply. And so this might be a very long video where I genuinely try to convince you that PvP servers and PvP as the default option in an MMORPG is not only the correct way to do it objectively, but that it can also be done right in a way in which even people that are currently getting away from it because of the toxicity that is so prevalent might actually want to try it again, and in a way in which even if they did have to actually interact with PvP, it wouldn't be this horrible experience. It would just be part of the game, exactly how it started as and exactly how it's meant to be. And that the default for any server, for World of Warcraft specifically, should be PvP on, and why. But also that this is not coming from the perspective, once again, of a guy that just wants to PvP, because I'm just like you. If you're a PvEer, I do almost only videos right now on dungeons and raiding and open world. There's almost no PvP for me to do, but I'm a well-rounded player, I'd like to think, and I don't just say that because I want it to be applied to myself. I genuinely enjoy all aspects of World of Warcraft, and I do firmly believe that PvP is one of the major pillars of the game, and that the only reason this is even happening right now is because people just haven't balanced it properly, haven't made the right decisions, and so because that doesn't happen, now players say, well, I'm either going to completely remove it from my life entirely, or I'm going to advocate for game modes that, you know, basically do remove it entirely, like war mode on a PvE server. And I hope by the end of this video, you either agree with me if you don't already, or you at least say to yourself, he made some good points. Maybe I should at least think about these other people that want PvP to be this way and balancing the game around that rather than banning it entirely. But before I can even talk about that, I have to convince you that World of Warcraft is actually a PvP game. And so therefore, taking it out of the game in any way is actually a really big major thing that handicaps the game for a lot of players. Okay, so just to start everything off, let me explain to you guys why World of Warcraft is actually a PvP game, and why arguments to refute that are just heavily biased and absolutely incorrect. Once again, I'm not coming at this because I want the answer that I come up with to be true. I'm coming at this after thinking very deeply about it and objectively coming to what I believe is the right answer. Okay, the very first point. The game is called World of Warcraft. It's set up in a world where there are two factions that lore-wise hate each other and are known to kill each other on sight due to deep racial hatreds and or distrust. And when you play this game, you take the side of one of these two factions, you are told exactly what I just told you, and then you are set out into the world, and the game is literally designed in which some zones are safe zones, and some zones are literally called contested because you are supposed to contest them by fighting other people in that zone. So from a lore-based perspective and from the literal perspective of the way the game is set up, it is a PvP game. Number two, though, if we want to get to the gameplay of it, it is absolutely no surprise to anybody, or it should not be, that one of the things that actually makes WoW good at all is actually how good the characters function and the classes function in PvP. Because WoW has immaculately designed character models and the way they function in PvP, the smoothness of it all, from multiple angles, by the way, right? Like the readability of the character, the general art style and color palette of the game. The classes are also very well done when it comes to design in regards to PvP. There's a lot of thought that went into the idea of what certain classes have at certain levels and how those classes compete with each other. Admittedly, in some expansions, they didn't think well enough about it than in other expansions because they undervalued the ability, for example, CC to be so crazy powerful, or the burst of some classes to be overwhelming. But outside of competence problems, once again using that word, thank you for the guy in the comment section that pointed out that he thinks I say that too much. For the most part, it's a very well-designed game for PvP, but also a very novel effect in many ways, although not inherently unique to WoW, obviously. But they've set up many different rules for PvP-specific encounters, like diminishing returns, or how long certain CCs will last in PvP versus PvE, although admittedly that came mostly at later expansions past vanilla. Still a good point. But they learned, okay, and it is a learning process, or it once was. The game feels good in PvP. The game functions well in PvP. The game world is built around PvP. The lore is built around PvP. There are PvP objectives, PvP battlegrounds, eventually PvP arenas. And if you honestly take it in its most honest and objective form, the game is boiled down into 4 different types of gameplay: open world leveling, PvP, dungeons, and raids. In many ways, raids and dungeons could be combined, and we could just say open world, PvP, and instanced PvE. But some people are really trying to simplify this to their specific needs, and they're trying to get rid of one aspect of the game and combine a couple others. PvE, which now suddenly includes open world, even though it should not, because open world is actually a combination of the other two, and it's completely unique from the content that I mentioned. And then PvP. When you break it down into those 3 bits of content, if we actually slim it down to 3, and you start to eliminate PvP and you wrap up open world into the PvE genre, in my honest opinion, you've eliminated a third of the game, quite honestly, but in my mind, half the game, because part of what makes open world fun is the spontaneous open world PvP. So in my mind, this is not a small thing, because I like the whole game of World of Warcraft. That's why I really want to make this video. I do believe that this mindset is really toxic overall, because I think it affects 2 types of people, and they're the most important ones. Number 1, it affects the developers and the decisions that they make, and then number 2, it affects the player base and who actually remains playing the game at all, and then how that pushes the game in certain directions. But not only that, it affects the mindset of the people that play your game and all of the preconceived notions that they create and they have a hard time getting out of later down the line. In other words, ultimately what my main plea is going to be is to understand this: PvP is not inherently any of the negatives that we think it is. And the answer to your PvP woes and your dislike for PvP is not to get rid of it or to minimalize it, where even the people that like it have to admit that they can't actually enjoy it with the systems that you actually pursue. Perhaps the answer is not actually to do that, but instead to actually balance it, to work on ways to make it better, not to remove it, not to say I want to run away from it, because that's the other 2 options. If you look at it solely objectively, perhaps the most fair option is not war mode. Even if you don't like it, perhaps the most fair option is a PvP mode with balance changes that stamp out all the toxicity. So with that out of the way, and I do think that's objectively right, I do think that tells you that WoW was meant to be played with PvP as the rule set. I know they had PvE servers, but guess what? They also had roleplay servers, and that doesn't mean you had to roleplay. It was an option, and these options are not done for any other reason other than to get more people to play your game for money. The thing is, if you only have one single server, you have to do it in the way that the game was intended to be played, or you screw over a lot of people. If you do it with just roleplay or just PvE, certain things die, certain things go away. But if you do it with PvP, none of the other ones go away, and PvP can actually exist. I'm sorry, but that just can't be ignored. But I do think it's inherently unhealthy to run away from things instead of encountering them head on. It's still a video game, and that's true, but if you don't think there's a difference between a 15 to 20-year-old video game that people have quite literally devoted their lives to, both casually and not, and just picking up a single-player game or a random game and playing it for 3 months or even maybe only a week, then you've got a whole nother thing coming to you, because it's fundamentally different. What I'm trying to say is, WoW not only deserves this type of thought, but it's earned it, and it's valid. So, with that being said, let me get into my other point. Let's just start off by defining what PvP really is, and then defining what PvP is not. This is partly my opinion, but it's also not. It's also what I truly believe, that if you objectively look at the game and you objectively look at PvP, and you're trying to look at it from a fair perspective with some kind of moral compass, right, that you'd come to the same conclusion. This is very important. I've studied a lot of history, okay? And what I've realized in history is that not everything that becomes dogmatic necessarily started for nefarious reasons. In fact, they almost always started for the sake of some form of discipline. And if it wasn't discipline, it was an aspect of virtue. It was an aspect of attempting to categorize what you are trying to become and make it fit in your brain so that it's easier to become that way. And so what I'm going to attempt to do, as I try to explain, is kind of redefine PvP and make my definition the objective definition, because it means something more than just player versus player, right? PvP in World of Warcraft is a little bit different. It's not just any aspect of trying to attack somebody, you do it. Because we know that every aspect of trying to attack player, you just do it, is an awful code to live by, because it results in things that we'll end up mentioning in this video that are disgusting. Killing low-level quest givers, level 60s killing low levels, anybody high level killing low levels, griefing, toxicity, hyper camping people, even just camping in general, which is just disgusting, and it's like one person just trying to hurt you the whole time. He just doesn't care. You know, it's for his pleasure. That is what happens when you allow PvP to exist in totality with no limitations. And in my opinion, that means that's not real PvP. In my opinion, it's incorrect to try to give it a brand new word. What makes more sense is to redefine what PvP means within the context of an MMO. And by very lieu of that, we have to dictate what it should not mean, and we should play around it. And I can explain this extremely deeply, and this video is going to help me do it, but just as a quick point, in case you're still skeptical as to how what I'm saying is fair and how I'm trying to change a definition here, let me put it like this. The thing that makes an MMORPG different from another game, a game that hyper focuses on the concept of PvP, rather than a game like World of Warcraft that inherently has to have it all because it's a world, is the very concept, the two words I just said right there in front of your face, is the fact that it's a world. It's an MMORPG. You are a human or a character, a race of some kind, an orc, in a world, living a different life to some degree. Lots of people take it very seriously. They don't even know it. Every bit of socialization they have is on the internet. And MMORPGs, those people are on a whole nother level because they actually, in some ways, are physically there with their friends. Whereas in other games, you know, you're just queuing up for a quick match or something like that. In MMORPGs, you are in it. That's like, oh, I'm logging in today and that's my person today. This is what I am. These are my friends and this is what I have to do. Now, everybody takes that serious to a certain level. Some people so little that you barely notice it at all. But ultimately, that's a commonality among MMORPG players. And so you say, what's the point? How does it relate to PvP? Well, the point is, in the real world, attacking another person is different based on the context of the attack. And not every version of attacking somebody would ever be considered right. You can't just go and murder somebody and say, but I can attack people sometimes. Why can't I attack this person? That's what this is. No. And even when I explain it with real life terms, by the way, you're already thinking, oh, it's different, right? No, it's only different based on exactly what I'm trying to do right now for MMORPGs. It's different because we've set up rules for it. Because just allowing it to be free for all would allow people to like have a purge go on or something like that. It would be chaos. And so we have words for murder, and we have words for defending yourself, and we have words for war. Because certain things mean certain things in the context of attacking another person. And the rules are different than in other things for very obvious reasons, and I think I argue that pretty well here. An MMORPG is a world. When people are living in that world, even if you don't think it's a big deal and you're like, it's just a game, bro, relax. An MMORPG is a little bit different. It's a hobby, sure, but it's a little different. I don't go to knitting classes and smack people in the face and say it's a game, bro. You know, I don't throw their fucking yarn at them. Like, I don't say it's a game, bro. It's just knitting. It's just yarn, bro. Grow up. I don't do that. So we have to have some semblance of morals. So what I'm going to end up doing is trying to, again, give you guys almost like a knight's code. What is real PvP? So first of all, to me, a PvP encounter that you should embrace, that you should think is fine, whether you win or you lose, is one in which both players are at an equal playing field to a fair degree. And I know that's very dicey. And based on that definition, I want to say some things should go away entirely. And then of course we can add on to it to prop up what makes good PvP fun, competitive, and interesting, intertwined or woven within the very fabrics of the game itself. Something not that, you know, dissimilar from I want to do a dungeon or a raid today or a daily quest, like it is for many players, but has begun to fall out of favor with a lot of players to where now they don't even consider it a part of the game. What I'm going to be doing is trying to explain why it all goes together. And there's only one way to make that work. And once again, it's to redefine how we see PvP within the context of an MMORPG. What is PvP? What is not? And that's what I'm going to try to do. First of all, we have the idea of like somebody being level 25 and you're level 21. It is a big gap. That's probably the biggest gap you'd want to be before you can start really blaming the level gap on why you lost. But that is still a fair gap. What's not fair is a level 40 killing you and you're level 31, a 55 killing you and you're level 27, a level 60 killing anybody below level 60. That's just a guy power tripping on you. That's not PvP. Here's a hot take. Ganking is not unfair. Ganking is PvP. When you're in the open world, the only way for somebody to engage you, 9 times out of 10, let's just say, is through ganking. So to say ganking is toxic just means you're misconstruing what's actually bad about what just happened to you. Ganking is just a word for somebody else engaged the fight on me before I either knew they were there or just first. But typically there's that inherent idea that it was a surprise. But the thing is, you can mitigate the surprise. You can play around it and you can think about that. So you might not have done those things and that might make you salty. But from my perspective, that's not even what people mean. I don't think people even have a problem with having to think about that. That's the point of the game. Some people might, but I think the main thing is that people always have an extra thing to add on to the ganking. Oh, it's so cool when a max level ganks my level 20. Oh, it's so cool when 3 people kill 1 person. Wow, that's PvP. I get it. I know those arguments and you're right about those. That's not a problem with ganking. That's a problem with people. A problem that, as I'm trying to do in this video, I think we can actually balance around, fix, and prevent. But a level 35 that attacks your level 34 before you even know they're there, you know, like a rogue that cheap shots you when you're at 80% on a mob, if he's like within a level or 2 or 3 of you, that's normal. It's how you react to that, right? But if the rogue is 47 and you're level 31, now it's disgusting, and I admit it. But that's not ganking. It's ganking with a caveat, a very toxic one. It's important to keep in mind that ganking does not really necessarily imply that it's a higher level guy on a lower level guy. It only really implies that one guy got the first hit before the other guy knew they were there. Please keep in mind, I'm not trying to convince you that you should like PvP. What I'm trying to tell you is that this is a part of the game, and just because you're biased against it, it's not actually because of PvP itself as much as it's because of toxicity within the PvP community, that of which we can fix, make better, and then put in rules into place in which you might even start to like it. But under the current way that it is in all MMORPGs, but specifically World of Warcraft type games with their war mode feature, is that ultimately we're breeding a whole new sentiment in the game itself, one in which the entire lore and the entire way the game is fundamentally set up in the world is irrelevant, but also one in which it fundamentally plays against the ability for one side of the game to ever even get new players, and for the majority of the people that want to play in that game mode to ever have the opportunity to participate in it at all. It's being effectively removed because people are biased towards it. And this is a really big hot take on my part that I've already implied as well, but I actually think that part of the reason it's got to this point is because developers, but I think it's specifically Blizzard and then private server devs just copy Blizz, right, are doing what humans tend to do. They always take the easy way out, even if it's not for the best. They're taking the easy way out, and you're giving it to them. You're giving Blizzard a free pass to not self-reflect at all and not make their game better. It's not necessarily because they think you're right or anything like that. It's an appeal to the least possible resistance, the easiest possible option, making their lives easier. Well, guess what? They get paid too well for an easy life. I say we deserve a better game. If you think deeply about this, you're being duped, and you think you're on the right side because you hate something so vigorously. Think deeply about that. So really what I'm trying to do ultimately is appeal to your ability to reason and say, listen, you might not like it, but I do see your point. And if we fix the ultimate true bad problems, is it not fair at that point that we can just have PvP as the default setting in our faction-based, war-based, MMORPG, where the point of the whole game is to not just play with people, but to interact against them as well? Now, I understand it's become the sentiment right now to say I don't have any consent involved in being attacked. But quite frankly, if you eliminate all the cancer from the equation, the camping, the max levels, the multi-fights, all the things that are just wasting your time, and it's just a regular fight with another player, win or lose, they're within your level bracket, outside of crazy things like your class balance or your personal skill, that's a fair fight. I would find it really weird if you said, yeah, I still don't want that. Because I'll say this one time, and I might say it again actually in the video, I don't remember. PvP always dies on PvE servers, but PvE never dies on a PvP server. All that really tells you is that on a PvE server, you are literally setting PvP up to die to where it becomes not a viable option. But on a PvP server, PvE players, they might complain sometimes, and if you fixed everything I said to fix, I bet they'd complain a lot less, maybe almost not at all. But it doesn't prevent them from playing the game the way that they want to play the game like the other side does. Big difference. In other words, PvE players can actually do something about PvP players, even on a PvP world. But PvP players can't do anything about everybody opting out of PvP. And when you factor in the fact that PvP is a part of World of Warcraft, it's a really weird catering for a certain type. And the main argument is just because you might be in the slight majority, and based on this poll, it's not as big as people think, doesn't mean you should have all the power to change the fundamentals of a game, just because of a few bad apples that we can balance it all around. And we can fix it so you never have to experience any kind of toxicity ever again, but in return, we can actually have a full MMORPG again, with all aspects of it working as intended. So having a PvE server is inherently anti-PvP, but having a PvP server is not inherently anti-PvE. I'm gonna use a quick analogy so I can slap some people in the face who are biased right now and they haven't been convinced. If I want to play jungler on League of Legends, I can't have it to where Riot says, okay, we're just gonna make it to where you can't attack the jungler if the jungler doesn't want to be attacked anymore. Instead, he just fights mobs. No, the jungler still has to try to fight the other players too, even if he gets ganked in his jungle and he doesn't like it. The answer is to learn how to play around that and get better at that, not to remove the ability to attack the jungler. So PvE servers, or by lieu of that, any server with war mode on it, is inherently a negative for the game. And it also doesn't make sense. It genuinely harms PvP in a way in which PvP players don't actually harm PvE. Again, stripping toxicity out of the equation, it's not balanced anymore. At least not in favor of the side that you originally thought. It also means nobody ever learns how to do it. Nobody even thinks about it, and they don't even consider it part of the game. They consider it a side part of the game. Do you see how that's a problem? If you didn't understand what I said before, you should understand it now. PvP is a part of the game. It's not an opt-in, like dungeons are not an opt-in, and raiding is not even an opt-in, insofar as you can theoretically still opt out of it by simply not participating. But it doesn't mean that you do things to decentivize people from raiding and doing dungeons instead of just making those bits of content better. It doesn't mean you make raids and dungeons a complete opt-in to where they are seen as a mini-game to people rather than an integral part of the game itself. It means if you don't want to get killed in PvP, you quest in areas where you don't think a player is going to be. You go into a city, you bring a friend along and you equal it out. You learn how to run away and utilize your class with a polymorph, a nova, a hex, and then run away. And you could say that's a waste of your time or something, but no more than doing a dungeon because you have to get one piece of gear, so you end up in there 30 times is a waste of time. But what it also is the developers needing to integrate changes with the game itself, a new way to look at MMORPG PvP, a way in which people would actually want to play it, because one of the things I'm very honest about is that those of you that are against PvP right now are not in it, at least in the majority, right, for bad reasons. You have good reasons for it, but it doesn't mean you have to get rid of it once again. It means you put pressure on the developers to be creative and come up with good ideas and maybe give them good ideas, and I'll try to do that in this video, but it also does take a mindset change on your part as well. Some self-reflection, an appeal to reason. It's a slippery slope. Okay, now here's the last thing I want to say that's actually toxic PvP, and that is when multiple people attack you and you're by yourself. Not only is it always unfair, but it's also extremely cringe. Now, I was able to solve this with some ideas on Ascension, and they implemented it in their own way, and they had their own ideas, maybe before me too, but all I know is I made videos on it, and then it came true, which is with this system called honorable combat. In my opinion, honorable combat should be in almost every zone, and then some zones can be more free-for-all, but let me explain. Honorable combat means only one person can attack one person at a time. Once those two people are in combat, nobody else can attack them because they are in honorable combat. That means you can only ever be in a 1v1. Maybe some crazy zones like Eastern Plaguelands or Silithus become free-for-all zones. Maybe any zone with a world boss, for example, is a regular free-for-all zone. That would not be hard to make happen. But after everything I said, if all of that was fixed, there is nothing bad about PvP at that point. Now, there might be some other niche examples there, but I think I made my point. Anything that's you just being toxic for the sake of you being toxic, you're just doing a mean thing, you're eliminating skill from the equation on purpose just so you can can pick on people, that is not fun. That's not PvP. There is some nuance there, because somebody would say, my HP was low and you attacked me, but he's 29 and you're 28. The game is actually set up in a way in which it is possible for you to make a comeback if you're paying attention. It's not entirely against you unless you don't pay any attention at all. So as long as all the other factors are within the confines of being fair, then ultimately, even if you're the one that gets ganked, that's just the game. And once again, it comes all the way back to how you react to it, and also not taking it personally in real life. So ganking is just attacking another player. We've just added an extra word to it. Ganking is not really the main issue here. Ganking, when you have all these other things going for you, like an increased level, increased amount of players attacking you, or crazy advantages that might come down to bad balance, again, something you pressure the devs about, not something you actually just deal with. Those are the real problems. It's not just ganking. I think so many people don't understand it, and that's why they're so afraid of it and they want to ban it. But what you might not realize, what you may have never been taught, is that ganking is not the only part of world PvP. It's not just predator, predator, predator. It's predator, and then also adapting the mindset of the prey. What I'd like to do in this next section is talk about the real dynamic of world PvP when it's done correctly, the predator versus prey concept, and I want to explain both sides so that one side is properly represented, which is the prey side, how it's actually fun, and also why it's not inherently toxic. First of all, this whole predator versus prey thing is something I've been thinking about in regards to MMORPG PvP for a very long time. I actually built my channel on throwing in world PvP while I level the entire time, and it was always going to be under that world PvP predator versus prey kind of mindset, often with me being the predator. But actually, some of my best clips ever were me making a comeback because I was the prey, or at least I was seen as the prey. So in world PvP, there's a completely different dynamic from actual instanced or arena-based PvP, and that's the predator versus prey one that I keep alluding to. You have two types of people, and they're always interchanging their roles, so that's important to keep in mind as well. You're not supposed to just be one role, although it's often fair to say that when you're new, you will most likely be just the prey. But in many ways, that's not always true, because I jump into random new games all the time where lots of people are better than me, and I just decide I'm gonna find people and kill them. I become the predator with only a day of experience. I learn as I lose, but also as I begin to win, and I just have fun as the predator, but also as the prey, and I learn and I get good. Now, I'm not saying I'm better than people for that, because the whole point of this video is that I think all of you are the same in terms of competence as I am, and that's supposed to be the point. Nobody is just better than you because they're in the predator position, and you should always try to be a better version of yourself in everything that you do. You will never, ever regret it, but you might regret being inferior on purpose, and that's a big part of this discussion. So the predator aspect of it is the guy that's obviously doing the ganking. The whole point of being a predator in PvP, when you're in the open world, you are constantly on the lookout for somebody to kill. It might even mean, if you go back to some of my old high-risk videos, that you start to memorize where people would be questing, where people would be in big numbers, because you want to increase your chance of encountering somebody so you can get into that adrenaline-filled, fun PvP encounter more often than not. When you're the predator, you have to come up with an idea of how you're going to kill your opponent as quickly as you can. As long as they're within the confines of the rules I mentioned, no griefing, no camping, within your level range, all that jazz, right? Then suddenly, if you can kill them quickly, you're actually pretty good for it. What that requires is mastering your class and how your class performs at certain level ranges against other classes. It's actually one of the biggest problems with Project Ascension is that because it's classless, you never really know what people have, and it eliminates a big part of the skill equation in all forms of PvP. But in every other version of WoW, this is still there, alive, and kicking. Let me give you guys a quick example, because I know all sorts of these examples from all my time playing every expansion of WoW. So here's one. Let's pretend I am a level 17 hunter, and I just happen to be ganked by a level 26-ish druid. Maybe 24, something like that. Now, quite frankly, this is actually in the unfair level range department, so if you wanted to, you could change the numbers for the sake of example to be 21 versus 17, like at the outer end of it, something like that. But I'm going to give you an extreme with my first example, just to prove a point. So if you were this 17 hunter, you could say, oh, damn it, this guy's an asshole. I'm going to admit defeat. He's just going to root me. He's going to get on top of me with his bear form and his cat form. He's going to destroy me. His freaking Wrath and Moonfire are ranked way too high for my level. I'm not going to win. Or you could be a Chad. And when the predator attacks you, then we get to the part of being the prey. Now, the prey in World of Warcraft PvP is not just the sheep in the field that gets killed by a wolf and just sits there and takes it, right? The prey is always looking for opportunities to be the one that counters right back. Quite literally, you always have to be on the lookout for the counter attack. Now, in every aspect where toxicity is not involved, this is the one thing that most WoW players get wrong, and you can't really blame them because PvP keeps getting stripped from the game anyway, so anytime they ever encounter somebody in the open world, they only see it as a nuisance. But in reality, it's part of the game and you're just not playing it right, so I'm going to help you out. So in this example, the 17 hunter who is ganked by the predator 26 druid, he could kneel over and die, but he has a fundamental understanding of class dynamics at all level ranges. And it just so happens to be that if a hunter plays perfectly at that level range against a druid who also plays fine at that level range, there is a skill gap as you can see, that the hunter can actually win. But if you didn't have enough knowledge and you didn't know anything about the game at that level, most of you would have given up and then maybe raged at the person or went on Reddit and complained because I hate these max level players killing lobies, it's not fair. Turns out, this wasn't supposed to be fair, but this guy had a refined knowledge of how to play the game at this level range, and he won anyway. And then there you go, even though you were the prey, you still won. But there's other ways you can abuse being the prey, both with a skill gap, but also a fundamental understanding of class dynamics. And let me tell you something, the satisfaction you're gonna get when you win a fight that they thought you couldn't win is going to be immense. But you have to think, and you have to be willing to learn, and you also have to be willing to lose. And I think this is extremely important for this conversation. Ultimately, the final point that I really want to make is, I don't really think people are coming at the PvP problem right from a fair perspective. I think they're horrendously biased. And I'll make it make sense by saying this about myself first. I like every part of the game. Go track all my videos. At this point, sadly to say, the majority of them have nothing to do with PvP. Listen, I don't always enjoy every aspect of PvP, but the way that we're going about it is definitely not fair. So I think that ultimately the underlying truth is, even if we got a server that was PvP based, and we eliminated all of the griefing and camping and all the toxicity from the PvP equation to a fair degree, then at that very moment, PvP becomes what it's supposed to be, a part of the game, where you fight somebody around your level range from the opposite faction based on the lore and gameplay reasons I already outlined. You either defend yourself or you go on the hunt. You beat people, you make comebacks, you lose sometimes, and it becomes a normal part of the game. So if I took everything I just said in aggregate and I tried to give you guys some rules, almost like a 10 commandments for PvP, something that should be heavily looked at when balancing PvP on all MMORPGs, and similar to maybe a constitution or something, we think of the idea of like being able to amend it later on when we have more and more ideas. These are what my first 4 rules would be. Number 1, we have to start off with reducing the level range in which a player can fight another player so that we can guarantee that all encounters you have are going to be with somebody that you theoretically have a chance against. So we've seen this on Ascension. They've tried both a 5-level difference and a 3-level difference, and I think the 3-level difference was the most fair. A guy in the comments said 4. I think that'd be fine too, but I think we can all agree more than 5 is always wrong. So that's the first step, because at that precise moment, guys, every single person you fight is suddenly within a fair level range of you being able to succeed against them. It's not toxic anymore in that regard, level range wise. Now, once again, the next thing you have to do is add an honorable combat mode to the majority of zones in the game. Some zones should be multi because group PvP is a part of an MMORPG as well. But perhaps it should be the case that multi-zones are more of a max level thing, and that while leveling, most of the zones are honorable combat, if not all of them, so that you can guarantee you're going to get into fair fights. And I think if they were actually savvy at their job, they would make one major change here, which is that groups of players can actually engage in combat with other groups of players. So if you're in a group and another person comes up and they're in a group, they can fight each other. Now, there might be a mismatch in the amount of people, but I think at that point, if you try to go any further, it would just be way too complex. But the caveat of this is trying to make it fair, right? So the idea is 1v1 or group v group, but no mixing the two, and that should be how it is in the majority of zones. Another thing you could do, once again, make all the quest givers and flight masters immune. They should not be able to die in PvP. Other NPCs could die. Shopkeepers might even be able to die, although that's a debatable one. But I don't think anybody of relevance should be able to die in regards to allowing people to progress their character, because you can always find another shopkeeper, but you can't always find another quest. And also things like flight masters, you can't always find another flight master. But then also we get to the point of camping, where I believe that if you simply did what Ascension ended up doing for high risk, Ascension's had some good ideas, a lot of which I've tried to push over the years, and so I'm really happy they got added, because they give me a little bit of proof, is that you should give people a timer when they die to somebody in PvP. If I kill you in PvP, maybe you have a 5-minute timer of immunity, maybe even 10 minutes, to where the same person can't attack you within that time frame. And so quite frankly, and I've seen this on Ascension, when you have a gap like this artificially created, people end up going their separate ways. What's even better about that is if you die, you can immediately res, immediately start eating and drinking, and literally do whatever you want with no fear of getting killed again by the same guy. Again, I wouldn't even care if the freaking timer was 20 minutes, to be real with you, because I don't think killing the same person twice in a row is good, fair PvP. If you kill them once, most of the time you've basically cemented that you're going to win, and quite frankly, if they think they have a chance, it should be their choice to engage again. And I think that that's as fair as it gets. If you do what I just said, then at this precise moment, we have 4 new rules to what makes real PvP work in World of Warcraft, in MMORPGs, and we don't have to stop there, but that's the point to begin at. The only other option is what we're currently doing, which is really slowly phasing PvP out and or killing it entirely and running away from it. I'm only advocating to use some reason and logic here. Start with these 4 principles. Start getting rid of anything that breaks those 4 principles. Look at what I said not to put in PvP. Start getting rid of that, and then say, okay, what do we have left? And start building upon that. I think we've eliminated almost every form of griefing or toxicity that's even available in PvP. At that point, the only thing left is stuff you can't control, like somebody humping your body after they kill you. And also, this is a minority case thing, right? So that shouldn't be something we base everything on. Now, with those 4 out of the way as the foundation, we have to start talking about other things we could do to prevent toxicity and bad sportsmanship in PvP so that we can promote the things that we actually want to see in PvP. Now, this is where we get into the realm of what I call integrity changes, right? So another example would be not allowing certain world buffs to be dispellable so people can't just dispel them and, you know, just for the sake of hurting you. It's not even strategy at that point. You're not competing for world first or Nixia or something. It's just somebody being a dick to a bunch of other people. So to me, that's not real PvP in this new code of conduct. And we're going to go over some other examples as well. I might also recommend for certain types of CC, like let's say mind control, that you have more diminishing returns on it, or maybe put a cooldown on it. I really don't think it would take away much from mind control for it to have a 30-second cooldown so that you, or 15 seconds even, so that you can't just keep mind controlling someone until you drown them or, you know, put them in lava. But being able to do it one time at Lumber Mill to throw them off a cliff, that should be perfectly fine. Obviously, you can't just nerf mind control, polymorph, and fear with a cooldown and do nothing else to them. But the idea is to change your philosophy so we can start getting genuinely good PvP changes in the game that also don't ruin the class fantasy or completely gimp people. You know, if polymorph no longer healed but was on a 20-second cooldown, and mind control obviously has a shorter duration and you can control the player, that has a 30-second cooldown, and fear maybe has a 15-second cooldown but you add that baseline slow at the end of it for like 20 or 30% reduced movement speed, that's at least a better start than perma fear, perma polymorph, perma mind control, and whatever other long form CCs there are where people can grief you, be toxic, and also they completely ruin the dynamic of PvP. In its most simplest form, CC does not even mean crowd control. CC means one person cannot play the game for the duration of the spell. So when you understand it from the most basic level, you have to understand CC should rarely exist, but when it does, it should be meaningful and balanced around. When you do that, you can start doing way more to the game. You can start looking at the game differently. You can start buffing classes in different ways. But they haven't even got to this fundamental point yet, this foundational concept of PvP. They just kind of make it up with every expansion, it feels like, and they just put random stuff in the game. Before you know it, rogues can perma-CC you in vanilla, but another class like Shaman has 0 relevant CC, so there's a situation in which, sure, if you're lucky and the rogue is not looking at you, you could kill him as the Shaman. Maybe your damage isn't too low, but you can't because you can't play the game, because CC means the other person can't play the game for the duration of the spell. So there have to be checks and balances, and I think that's a really good place to start. In other words, I could do this for every single thing you could ever mention, and eventually we'd come up with a PvP server that has almost no griefing or anything, or any toxicity outside of absolutely minute things. And before you say the people that want to PvP are going to PvP regardless, that is absolutely not true, and I am personally living proof of it. I love PvP, I adore PvP, currently on every server I play, all of which, by the way, have adopted war mode systems, I don't PvP. And that's because when you make a PvE server and it starts off with everybody defaulting into PvE, you get no new players, nobody learns it organically, you only get people that already have PvP'd, that among those people, most of them don't play your server to begin with because they know there's not going to be PvP, but among the ones that do, it's already very clear to them that there's going to be nobody to play with. Before you know it, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, you think there's nobody to play with, and therefore there never becomes anybody to play with because nobody wants to queue and be the only person in queue just to wait for 7 other people. People want to queue and get in there within a couple minutes. Not only that, but because we're going to an extreme with the initial design against PvP to begin with, the only people that you're really going to see in PvP are the occasional people that want to dabble in it and then they quickly step out, and then toxic players or people that play in groups against other groups, and then occasionally those groups pick on solo players. Don't believe me? Look at literally every MMORPG in existence and what their PvP scene looks like. New World, RuneScape, World of Warcraft, and basically all the other ones but don't even have PvP outside of a very small niche community, and once again, that's part of why. And then before you know it, even though you gave the option for PvP, it didn't matter. You killed it. And then people say, aha, that's because nobody likes it. It's like, no, you set it up to fail. And then you also know that if it's a PvP server, a PvE player with all the griefing stuff in check and all of the recommendations I said would play the game completely innocently, being able to do everything they wanted, and if they did not want to PvP, could easily, super effectively, never engage in it, and still do every bit of content they want. All they'd have to do is sometimes think a little bit harder when they're in the open world. Is somebody going to be around me? Don't want to fight them? Polymorph, run away. Psychic Scream, run away. Get on your 100% speed mount, run away. Remember, with all the griefing stuff in mind, you're not getting multi-ganked, no max level players are ganking you. So many protections, right? You even have a PvP timer. That with all of this in mind, you know on a PvP server, PvE players are harmed significantly less than PvP players or anyone that wants to PvP ever on a PvE server are. Then doesn't your moral compass have to point you in the direction of simply making a PvP server as the default like it used to be? Because then everybody gets to have fun with the changes I mentioned, instead of only one group being able to enjoy it and one slowly fizzling out or never existing at all. This is why PvP is not the problem, and I think I told you exactly how to fix it. At least in the context of World of Warcraft, but if I could be totally honest, this really does apply in many ways in a broader sense to every PvP game that also has PvE, but specifically to all MMORPGs. There's a lot more I could go into, but this video is somehow ridiculously long already, and I just really want this to resonate with anybody that chooses to watch it. I'll be honest, I'm not trying to hit PvPers right now. I'm trying to hit the rest of you. But anyway, guys, if you enjoyed like this little monologue and my thoughts on why PvP is not the problem and how I would fix it, just like the video and leave a comment and just let me know, what do you think? Any comments, concerns? Obviously, the reason it's so long of a video is because I'm trying to also hit every base of any potential criticism, because I want to reiterate, the big problem with PvP is that there's too much nuance, and if you're not thinking deeply about it, and I'm talking about mostly from a design perspective, but also from a player perspective, then ultimately you're going to go to an extreme and you're going to make a mistake. But ultimately, PvP is not this unbalanceable, toxic monstrosity. It's just clearly something that developers don't know what the hell they're doing with, and players end up going to their extreme tribes with it, and that ultimately doesn't help anything. It just harms one group more than the other. In this regard, it happens to be PvPers getting hurt more than PvEers. I know it's a light thing, it's a game thing, but I'm going to make this very, very clear. God forbid the day when the PvPers get to have more fun than the PvEers. And then ultimately the PvEers are the ones that are fizzling out and they can rarely play the game they want to anymore, and people say, hey, if people want a PvE, they can group up in PvE, but we're designing the entire server in a way in which nobody would ever want to PvE on it. I think we can all agree that that would be equally as bad, all because people couldn't design their aspect of the game correctly, and it just created this big mess, and the side of the game that was designed better turned against the side of the game that was designed worse and just stamped them out instead of coming together intellectually and fixing it. It does happen sometimes. Look at all the shooter games that have no PvE content. The difference with an MMORPG is that inherently the idea is that both types of content exist, and one of them does not try to stamp out the other. And perhaps what's worse is you're taking out a little of what makes this game a world-based game, and you're diluting it into something smaller and smaller every single day. And if you don't think that's true, look at modern WoW, where everything is in an instance, everything is very, very homogenized, and nothing feels the same way that it used to feel. And remember, it's not even about the tribalist PvP versus PvE garbage. That's just one aspect of it. That's just one appeal to reason. The main idea is that it's an MMORPG. It's called World of Warcraft. This is part of the game. When you choose to remove something, to cancel it out, rather than actually working on it, in my opinion, you've gone the wrong way. And you're definitely not being fair. But I admit, if designers and developers can't make good decisions and can't balance the game properly, so that bad or toxic or shitty people domineer one of the spaces, and they, draw people away from it, then there's no way to make it better. So ultimately, yes, I do believe it takes a mindset change among you guys that already are biased towards it. But if I'm honest with you, you have no reason to change your mind if developers can't put in the necessary changes to fix it to begin with. And if all of them keep choosing the lazy way out of going for PvE with a fake war mode, which PvP players will play anyway because they just want to play World of Warcraft and they'll take their scraps, then I guess eventually it's just going to be one of those things where people say to themselves, if you want a PvP, you definitely never want to play those games. You only play those games if you want to slay dragons. And the problem with that statement is not that I'm saying PvE is bad, because once again, I really enjoy PvE. The problem with that statement is that it's no longer an MMORPG. It's something different, and it might not have a name yet, but it's almost like a solo player adventure NPC based game, but there happen to be other people running around sometimes. But if you can never actually interact with those people in any meaningful way, you can only group up with them to kill NPCs, that's not really an MMORPG. If when you go through the world, you rarely ever see another human being, and all you do is talk to people and do quests and level up, it's just a single player game. The whole point is that there's that element of, oh my god, somebody's out there. He might be my friend, he might be my foe, but now everybody's my friend in my war game. My faction-based, PvP-centered war game that's supposed to be built around being massively multiplayer. It just doesn't make any sense. That's my whole point on it, guys. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thank you if you watched this far into the video. Major thanks to all the members on my channel. Love and appreciate you guys, but I'll see all of you on the next one. Mcdoubles out.